Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest episode of On the Hot Seat. I'm your moderator, Lee Chin. So it has been a tumultuous time in Malaysia with a daily positive cases exceeding 10k and daily death rates breached 150. The healthcare system in the most populated part of the nation is at the brink of collapse, and struggling Malaysia lost their job as the economy contracts. It is no wonder why one political analyst actually opines that we are sailing through some of our darkest time as a nation. But will this change when our parliamentarian return to the August House on Monday itself? Today, we'll be examining some key events, in particular the political turmoil leading towards the special sitting of the parliament next week, and how all this will impact governance, the much speculated upcoming elections, and ultimately our democracy. So joining us today is Dr. Hamidin Abdul Hamid, a research fellow from Ilham Center, a political analyst as well. Doctor, maybe you wish to say hi to our audience.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Richin. Thank you for having me here.
You're most welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Another guest that we have tonight is it's Danesh Prakash Chako, director from Tindak Malaysia. Welcome, Danesh.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and good evening to everyone.
Good evening. Thank you so much both for joining us. Like I've mentioned today, like I've mentioned just now, I think one of the key topic today, we're talking about the parliament and the special sitting on this coming Monday. It's going to begin on July 26th, but we also know that the special sitting is only for 5 days. So I wanted to start on our discussion tonight on a very general footnote. Do you think this special sitting is at least going to a certain extent, answer the queries of many Malaysians, especially in the handling of our health crisis? Both of you, what do you think about it? Maybe, Doctor, you want to start?
Okay. Thank you, Richin. I think looking at how's things going and develop lately, I don't think this special session will give a whole lot of answer to the mind of Malaysians at this particular moment. I do believe what's government intentions for this special session is only to give explanations of the backgrounds of what's happening on the government effort about the pandemic and everything since the emergency ordinance was passed. So therefore, I do believe nothing much will be discussed and be debated at this particular. And particularly because there is no such thing to get approved by the House at this. Because of that, in my point of view, not many discussions or debate that we can see on the 26th. However, I do hope that government has to be transparent on whatever that they do. I hope they will table it openly to the parliament, so at least we know what's happened at this particular time.
So, what do you think, Danesh?
For me, I'm roughly in same concurrence in opinion with Dr. Hamidin. First and foremost, we have to understand that initially, when this special sitting session was communicated, it was actually was presented as though as a briefing session.
Yes.
So that actually defeats the purpose of any form of parliamentary sitting if it is just limited to that. Subsequently, Pakatan Harapan warned Perikatan National Government, the sitting government, that you need to allow even the debates for the special sitting. So then this has progressed that our minister in the Prime Minister's Department for Parliament and Law, Dr. Muhyiddin Hassan, stated that MPs can seek clarification. And Prime Minister Muhyiddin also returned to the Dewan Rakyat and also the Dewan Negara Speaker to allow MPs to debate. Okay. So we have come to this stage where there is the possibility of actually having debates or even tabling of questions. But you have to understand this matters has to be also be brought to the speaker. So for me, the first there will be an issue is will we see debates? And I really hope there will be, even though it's 5 days. But when it comes to effectiveness, it is very limited at best. Okay? So this is the reasons why I think this is limited, is because first, we can't escape from the issue about the majority that our Prime Minister holds in the House. That's first. Secondly, 5 days is too short. You have 222 parliamentarians. There's so many issues you would like to cover. From one is from the emergency ordinance to vaccination to education to economy, everything in between. 5 days
Yep.
is not enough. Okay? And finally, it goes back to my point: is will there be debates? And of course, our law ministers made that point. We need to see that happen.
Yep. I think debate is a key. It's a key to whether some of our questions could be answered, and whether especially in terms of the policies or whatever that have been made during this during the emergency period. So I think another topic that I would like to raise is this special sitting of the parliament is a result. I don't know, maybe this is my form of interpretation. It's a result of a maneuver initiated from the palace. So, what is the role of the YDPA or the Malay ruler in the Malaysian politics? Professor, Doctor Hamidin, what do you think?
Thank you, Lichin. If we look at the Malaysian history, I think, in my point of view, interestingly, in the past year or two, we can see people call it interference, but I think it's more role played by the palace, especially the Istana Negara, in regard to Malaysians' federal election, federal politics. Yes, indeed, in my point of view, the coming special session is very much partly there is a role played by the YDPA, especially after 3 times he issued a decree that Parliament should be should be a sitting of Parliament during the emergency, which, in my point of view, very much reflected of the general thinking of the people, and also for the expert and also other politicians who believe that Parliament should not be suspended because of the emergency, should be convinced as usual. So because of that, I think it's very interesting to see what is the role played by the YDPA. Indeed, in my point of view, it's not so much interference. Clearly, he still played a role within the constitutional approved by in the constitution. So therefore, in my point of view, it's very much a careful step taken by YDPA for ensure for him not to encroach the power of the people. Which I think that's why he made a call. He didn't call the parliament, which is still when the parliament was called for the 26, still because the advice of the prime minister, that's clearly written in the parliament. Interestingly, Lichin, in my point of view, when we look at this and we look at the future of Malaysian politics, also in the current situation, so basically we put a big question mark. What is going to be the big role or role of the palace in the future? Are we going to back to them when we start with the current political turmoil as it is today? So this is, in my point of view, where we have to be really careful in dealing with that. Because in my point of view, everything is clearly written in our constitution, what is there for the palace to get. And so far, in my point of view, YDPA plays that role perfectly well. But in my point of view, now is very much the ball is in the politician court to show that they are matured enough, in my point of view, to really think about the future of the country.
Yeah, I think, Prof, you raise a very good point. Like, the YDPA has played his role well, according to the constitution. Because I think at this period of time, whether to have a special parliament sitting or to have the parliament reconvene during the emergency ordinance, a lot of people wanted the YDPA to really step in or take a bigger role to it. But then, I think a lot of us, like what Prof have mentioned, we have to be very careful to tread the line, and we must be confined by the constitution. It's a pity that we can't have. I think some of our audience might have noticed that in our promotional material, we have mentioned that lawyer Lim Wee Jet, who is much more vocal on this issue, could have joined us tonight, but he has to excuse himself for some personal emergency. And so it's a pity that we can't have him and have his viewpoint here, especially in regards to the constitution and the role of the YDPA under the constitution. But I guess Prof did touch a very good point about it, about how we should be very careful. Dinesh, do you have anything to add on this topic?
For me, the roles of our king and also our fellow rulers, can see it has grown stronger recently, but it's not necessarily new. I would say I've noticed the same thing occurred during the waning years of Najib's era, that there's a period of time our elected government was in a slightly weakening and also in a progressively weakening stage. So this is where we notice not necessarily our Agong, but our respective state rulers, some of them have shown that they have a greater influence on certain political matters. And I want to drive this to the current situation because there is still a debate, who actually is able to convene the parliament. Like, is it the king can do this by himself, or that he has to go on the advice of the prime minister or the cabinet or someone who's authorized from the cabinet? I think what has happened is, from what I understood from the emergency ordinance, the statement is the ability to convene the parliament by Agong is in this way: the parliament shall be summoned on a date that the king thinks appropriate. So under this emergency period, actually, the provisions relating to summoning, proroguing, and the dissolution of parliament in the federal constitution shall not have effect. So this is the time period we are living until 1st of August. So the one line of argument which I believe more strongly on this is actually our king has the power to call for parliament sitting without necessary the intervention or the advice of the prime minister or the speaker. Of course, there is an argument from our esteemed Attorney General Idris Harun saying that our king is a constitutional monarch, hence he is bound on the advice of the cabinet. Okay? So building on this, the prime minister can choose the date, provide the date, and then this raises the question: do you need to give 28 days notice? So this is
Yes.
one of the recent arguments that's coming, because we have the situation is called special sitting, right? And special sitting, you don't necessarily. It's the argument seems to tie relate to Standing Orders 11, sub-regulation 3, if I understood correctly, where if the house is adjourned, I'm not sure whether at this point for me to say whether the house is actually adjourned. If the house is treated as to be adjourned, then this you can call the meeting because of public interest on short notice. So the only thing is, what does this special sitting amounts to?
Yep. Yep. I think that's a very good point you raise, and you're actually on the other side, which think that the emergency ordinance actually gave power to the YDPA to reconvene or to call for the parliament to reconvene. So that's that's a very different argument to it. I think when we look into what's going on, or what all those events that has transpired leading towards this special sitting, we can't really just like separate the whole thing out from politics. And we see how it's being played out. I think one part of it is, I think it really dropped a bomb in the in the nation when UMNO announced in late evening that they're going to pull out from Perikatan Nasional, and it's done by Zahid. So this shaky coalition may not withstand parliamentary scrutiny. So I think, Doctor, what's your take about this unstable political landscape? Would it fragment further? And what is the fate of Zahid? Because now we see what happened is, like, the threat doesn't really it didn't materialize, or it didn't really unturn anything. So maybe doctor, we can have your comment on this.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I think the threat is still there for me. I think the threat is still there.
Okay.
The question about the majority of the government is still there. And I think Parliament is still the best place for us to prove about the majority of the government. But I think the special session in coming weeks, I don't think that is the place. But I believe this in September one is definitely be vital for the government to at least to show that they have the majority. Indeed, if you look at the current situation, I think Zahid tried to pull out. Interestingly, I think there is some contradiction about Zahid's statement and also what's needed by a statement proposed by the UMNO General Assembly. UMNO General Assembly was calling president to pull out from the government. But what Zahid did in his PC, I think 2 weeks ago, was about not to give support to Prime Minister. I think that's two different
Yes.
things. There's a big
Yes.
debate in terms of that. So because I think what's happened is Zahid tried to find a compromise. He wants something, but he cannot get it, so he tried to find something else just to satisfy his own ego, maybe. Okay, I put it that aside for a while. So because of that, in my point of view, the situation will be the same. But I think definitely is give more ample time for Muhyiddin and his government to find a way to show by September that they have a majority. And that one thing. Second thing, if they can have what happened in Perak, for example, common and supply agreement between any parties, I think that will save them a lot, especially when it comes to the budget. That is a big thing that's coming in the next sitting of the parliament. So because of that, in my point of view, obviously, UMNO was not taken seriously by most of us as a political analyst. Definitely weakened Zahid's situation. But let me say this. In my point of view, without that statement, most of the people look at Zahid as already in the big, I think, not in the limelight of time. In my point of view, even without that statement, everybody knows that his time is basically over. However, as a politician, definitely he wants to delay things and prepare for the best for him if nothing happens to the court cases. So he's still there. So partly, in my point of view, most of what happened between UMNO now is very much for Najib, for Zahid group, also called the court cluster, try to prolong their life within the government. So with that, in my point of view, they will do a lot more. What we call it a threatened call to the government, but I don't think it will have more effect unless, in my point of view, there is a clear majority of UMNO MP want to get out of the current government. Then I think Muhyiddin will have a big problem. But so far, I think he very much secured in that section.
Danish, do you have anything to add on in this aspect?
So let's talk about the instability that is going on at the federal level. For most of us, we may not necessarily be accustomed to this. Maybe there's periods of time in our country's history we had this type of instability, but not true of this manner that you see where even the prime minister's position, the leader, is quite questionable in terms of the support that he gets from the House. However, I want to say that this sort of experience occurred in states. Different states, you refer back to the 1969 elections, you can see the situation what happened in Selangor and Perak. If you refer to the cases in Sabah in the 80s, the 90s, then the recent incidents like in Perak in 2008, and even up to even G14, some of the states that won with a very razor-thin margin in terms of elected representatives, right? And also you had the situation where it also happens in states. You have political factions, the elected government collapses, and you have a post-electoral coalition government that is built on defections. It has happened in the states. It's just that it just happened in a localized area, and we think about it for a month or 2 months, or maybe if there's a court case, it will drag out a bit, or maybe 1 year. But what has happened right now, it happens at federal. So it doesn't matter whether you reside in Perlis or Sabah, you actually feel it because all of you are under this particular federal government. So the instability affects everyone.
Yes.
Okay? So this is a phenomena that used to exist in states, even from the early days of Malaysia, finally transpired at the federal level. And for me, this also breaks the notion that our electoral system can generate stable governments, strong governments. Used to do so, let's say, for argument's sake, until 2013, or even we can push it 2018 for the federal level. But thereafter, no more. Because this argument that the first past the post system delivers stable governments, it exists in literature, let's be very clear. And it worked out in Malaysia. Of course, at the state level, you notice that theory doesn't work out that all the time. So now we have a situation that the argument that is used against, let's say, a more proportional system already applies here, just using the first past the post system.
If I may add,
Okay. Yes.
Lichin, if I may add from
Yes.
Danish point, I think it's a very good point in terms of
It is.
the structure. But I just want to give a picture where we are in terms of the current political situation. In my point of view, we Malaysians must be brave enough to admit that this is the new norm for us in terms of politically speaking. I think this instability, I think, will be there for the next couple of years to come, obviously. Why? Because I think after 60 years of almost one single party rules, suddenly we have a multiple choice that we never very much cemented in our mind. So we are in that situation of where we are still searching what is new for us, in my point of view. So politically speaking, I do believe looking at the fragmentation or the politics now, relationship between federal and state, which is never we experienced before, for example, and that will and the emerging of state politics, which I think will color most of our federal election. So therefore, in my point of view, for the next 1 or 2 general election, we will face the same thing until and unless we very much look at matters that with most, this is where I agree with Danish, we have to really address it structurally in terms of the issues. For example, systematically, what is that we have to do? Election system or any other structure that we have to know that for us to make sure that whatever happened, I think the state will survive. What's happened now, in my point of view, what is really scary for us, because for me, maybe because I'm trained as a historian, we always look at the past, but nothing in the past can guide us to some extent where we are. In fact, most of us are scratching our head looking at the fast development, what happened in Malaysian politics for the past, I think, 10 years, never being experienced for the past 60 years. So, but obviously, I think we move fast. But at the same time, I think I have to give a pat to the back to Malaysian society. We take that, in my point of view, in maturity. We don't see any much trouble, as for example, if we compare to 1969. I think that show that how mature we are in that sense. So, but please be brave enough to admit, okay, this is us now, where we stand. Maybe instability, maybe we can improve couple of points, but I don't think we're going to have a very much strong stability. Meaning, if you ask me, are we going to have a strong government with a 30 to 40 majority in the next election? I don't think so. And then meaning we need more new alignment within the parties, because in Malaysia, I think the first ruling is no party will rule Malaysian a single party. So we need collaborations, and we need that. So with that, in my point of view, we need not only looking at system of election, but also how the party work. I think that is something that we have to really look at.
Yeah. I think this is a very good point, and really Malaysian has to get accustomed to it, because in the past we have been instilled with this. We need a stable government to move on, to develop, even like maybe at times of crisis like this. I guess some Malaysians might appreciate what we have, the stability that we used to have under a government that has great majority. So I don't know. I think this is some of the sentiment I get from the ground, maybe, the good old times, the good old BN times. I don't know how this will pan out, the sentiment will pan out. I think it's yet to be seen. We really need to see how, as we approach the election, and see how it really pans out to be. But I also would like to I also would like to look into a few development in our political landscape. We see especially this general sentiment among the Malay communities. I don't know, maybe Prof, you could enlighten us a little bit about this. How is the general sentiment of the Malay community towards the handling of the health crisis? Some people say that this is an all Malay government. The Perikatan National Government is actually an all Malay government. And the political tussles between the Malay parties, how does the Malay community respond to it, and what is their reaction? Do you think we will have a different political narrative coming out of it that's gonna, one that is seeking for a fairer, or perhaps a more equitable country beyond the racial narrative that we are so accustomed to?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you, Lichin. I think it's a very interesting question. I think if people thought that they can sleep well because the rhetoric of this is all the Malay government basis, I think they are dreaming, in my point of view. Because when we do a survey for Ilham, we do a survey around March and April this year, looking at still most of the data that we get is still really looking, even though the COVID numbers is not as bad as the current one, but I think because of the year and a half, we can see, at least we can tap the sentiment of the Malays. We interviewed around 1,200 over Malaysian all over the country, but we only do that in the peninsula. And we notice that, in my point of view, as any Malaysians, the Malay doesn't look at what's delivered by the government, not because of their Malays or what, because of the service of the delivery. I think that's the most important part. And you can see the frustration of that. Okay, talking about, I think, the impact of the pandemic, talking about the school, PDPR, how they impact them in mostly economics. It becomes something that really much big. In fact, in most of our survey, we noticed that people are very much concerned about that too, more on the socio-economic rather than political one. So they don't bother about who's delivering this is Malay government or what, but what the most important for them is they deliver the best for the people. And obviously, I think with that, yes, definitely for the Malays community at this particular time, they are looking at leadership. I think looking at that, I think that is the problem not only among the Malays when we're talking about Malaysian political situation now. We're having a big problem of leadership in the country, especially, and then maybe make it worse in the context of Malays. So for them, who's next? Who will be the poster boy of Malaysian politics? So far, in my point of view, from the survey, another Muhyiddin Yassin is a bit safe in that part because there is no other alternative. I think that's the biggest point in term of that. So, but at the same, but don't be surprised in my point of view, because of the current election, his rating definitely, obviously, for us is going to no other but down. We noticed that, and they are struggling to keep that up. So for me, Malay's politics and large is very much critical of what's happening, obviously, and they still want to government to deliver the best for them because, in my point of view, looking at the current political pandemic situation, the Malays, they feel that they were impacted most because most of them are in the B40 and then most of them on the daily basis salary. So they were the most because of that. So with that, in my point of view, government definitely have to do a lot more. And obviously, this is where, in my point of view, the important for us to have a sitting parliament, for us to make sure that the government answer to any question raised by the people. I think that is the most important part. In my point of view, not only just to give a handout or information about what they're doing, but we can scrutinize them. And we notice that even in our survey, how people are very critical in term of that. So in my point of view, Malay's politics also generally is moving into the direction which we never witnessed before, which first become very fragmented, and second become very critical. Why? In my point of view now, because there is a choice for the Malays. Because before, maybe as we discussed just now, for the past 60 years, not much choice given to the Malays. But now I think for the past 10 years, there is suddenly Malays notice, hey, we have a choice. I think this is where, in my point of view, most of the political party must be aware of that. And even in some of other political parties, like the AP and MIC and others, if they want to play still in the same point as before, I think they can be big mistake. They really have to go and beyond usual in that sense. Because I think the Malays start, I'm not saying, begin to accept that, hey, as long as you are a good leader, we will vote for you. I think that is the rule of the thumb today. It's no longer the ethnic so much. So I think that is something good in Malaysian politics.
Oh, there's some hope, huh?
Yeah.
There's some hope. It sounds very inspiring or very hopeful. But I think sorry. Okay. Sorry, Professor. Also, I think it's interesting that you talk about Muhyiddin Yassin is like there's no alternative to it, but you think that there is a lot of options out there open for the Malay voters. Can you explain a little bit about the options that they have or whatever that's available for them, and what kind of options that you're talking at? Are you talking about the fresh faces, or the younger political new incoming parties, or what kind of options are there out there for the Malay voters?
Yeah, I think, Lichin, I think what's interesting when looking at this current situation, in my point of view, it's not necessarily we were stuck with the old system of party. I'm interested to look at maybe his name is very much always be over mentioned in Malaysian politics. But I think some people disagree with him a lot. But I was surprised looking at the Mahathir and Pejuang when he tried to rebrand himself and looking at the future of Malaysian politics. To some extent, that's in my point of view, give a clear directions how or what going to happen to Malaysian politics, especially among the Malays. So here, in my point of view, what we can see the alternative is given not only by the new organization but also new faces with the new mantra on politics for Malaysians. So with that, in my point of view, yes, I hope it's going to be a new organization that will emerge. We have Muda with Syed Sadiq cut across the ethnic line, and we also have Pang, and hopefully any other that will come. And I'm not saying bring down the whole system, but challenging the system. I think that is very much important. And obviously, we are in the desperate needs of a new leadership. I think this is where, in my point of view, Malaysians have to be brave enough to put themselves, who are capable to be really put themselves in the platform to lead in many other ways, not only in political, but to show that we are not short of any good leaders in the country.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So, Doctor, you think that these new faces in politics are like are like challenges to the existing system? Danesh, how do you look at them? Some of these new faces or new forces that's upcoming, or just shed some lights or some difference experience, or maybe to the voters. So, what do you think of them?
Okay, so I want to build on what Dr. Hamidin spoke about the choices.
Yes.
Yes, okay, so I will talk about this, and this is where I might have to differ a bit about my optimism about how Malaysians view politics. Okay, so even before COVID pandemic, this discussion, what I'm going to talk about, it's cross-cutting all race and religion. Yes, we are given a choice, and this happened in Seminyak 2019 by-election. You have two candidates. One candidate who represents a race-based party from the Barisan Nasional, and one race-based party from the Pakatan Harapan side. And then you have one ideological party, PSM, and you have a humanitarian. When the votes are counted, more than 90% of the population in Seminyak, which you can consider is home to rural, urban, and semi-urban voters for varieties, okay? So including also the Orang Asli people, Indians, Chinese, Malays, everyone. Most of them, 90% also, decided to vote for race-based party, even though the option is given, even though we are in the post-GE14 era. Okay. So of course, if you come from an academic point of view, we can say, oh, it's because first past the post system dictates that you should subscribe your voting choice tactically by choosing the one who is strongest or most likely to win. Okay. I would say, from an academic point of view, I agree. From a party strategy point of view, I understand. But as a Malaysian, you have the choice not to subscribe to that strategy. You should look into this case in Seminyak. For example, in that instance, you have alternatives compared to, let's say, the race-based parties. Why didn't you choose? It's a matter of choice, right? So the choice is given, but then there's another choice to act on the choices, right? Okay, so that's the first thing I need to highlight this. Of course, in the case in some other states, like let's say in Sabah, you have a lot of choice, and the choices are mostly personality driven. It's a different that we have in Peninsular Malaysia. Peninsular Malaysia is, let's say we take Seminyak, or the clear-cut difference between race-based and non-race-based candidates. Okay? So that, because I was later asked how can Malaysia move forward from race-based politics, right? Well, I always will refer to the Seminyak by-election. It's unfortunate speaking, it's urbanized status long, with a very good access to internet, with the post-GE14 era in mind, we failed to act on it. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to discuss. Okay, now the other part about why these choices occur is because of the fragmentations that is going on. Okay? Yes, of course, a political party is built because you have a common ideology, a common aspiration, right? But bear in mind, it consists of individuals who are all ambitious to be at the top of the party, and subsequently you want to win the government and also be at the top of the government. So this is what happens is that you will tussle for power, things go wrong, or ideology. It's not so much. Sometimes it will be ideological. Sometimes it's tactical positional difference. Then you split. Okay, so that's what you notice from the breakup from UMNO to Bersatu, to Bersatu, then you Pejuang, right? So you see that happen, right? This party fragmentation. Of course, then we have to divide this issue into two groups in parties in Malaysia: cohesive parties and non-cohesive parties. Maybe we can add a third category, the in-betweens. Okay. So fragmentation affects political parties who are not cohesive, and the impact can be quite serious. PKR is one example. You can see how serious splits, all it takes 10 or so people to move contributed also to the collapse of the Pakatan Harapan government. You can see how Bersatu splits, and now Bersatu is in a unique position that it doesn't hold the majority of the seats in the current government, but still able to hold. But your hold is very fragile, right? So that's one. Okay. So the parties that are not cohesive, either mostly I would say from an ideological point of view, your vulnerability to fragmentation is big. And secondly, the impact of the fragmentation of the mother party is big. Then you have cohesive and disciplined parties like DAP, like PAS, and I would say, okay, even the PBB party in Sarawak. Yes, PBB had experienced the split 2-3 decades ago. Right? That was the most major split they have experienced, and since then it is very intact. Right? These parties still will experience, disagreements. They will have their splits. Past split, you're having an Amana. Last time DAP would have split, and you have like parties like MDP. It happens. But fundamentally, these parties will be intact and is able to move forward, right? But by themselves, they can't form the government. So their vulnerability to fragmentation is low, and also the impact of the fragmentation is low. Okay. So the question is, whoever forms the government, we need to see, are they vulnerable to fragmentation within themselves? Not so much of the coalition collapsing, because coalition for me is a transient political object. A political party is a more stable political object. So this is why we have to look in this way. So when we look at the coalition, who forms it, one of the things you can study is which component parties are quite vulnerable to fragment and which parties are quite strong to survive. So with the fragmentation, you have choices. But I feel that some of these choices are personality driven, not necessarily, although they claim to be, I'm aspiring for a different Malaysia. Yes, all political parties aspire for a different Malaysia. But the reality is some are more individual driven. Okay? But even with these choices also, our electoral system is not necessarily in favor of smaller parties or very ideological driven parties with a very minimal geographical concentration. So, and this is what I'm seeing the issue that Bersatu will face about its future, because as you go to the next election, and let's say UMNO is not in the same bandwagon with you, you're going to go head on with UMNO. Who has the more stronger machinery? Who has the more disciplined machinery? And we can see what has happened to Semang 46. In 1990, they contested. They didn't bring much breakthrough. They tried to go more conservative, tried to compete with UMNO. But again, the question is who has more resources, who has more discipline, who has more better structure. Eventually, in 1995, they contested again, couldn't have a breakthrough, and eventually they closed shop. And this is why I am quite perplexed, even today, why Bersatu, who actually survived that GE40 swing, opted to pull out from Pakatan Harapan and put themselves in this situation, because this actually affects their political future of their existence.
Yeah. So, Doctor, do you have anything to add on in terms of this? Because Danesh touched on the political future of Bersatu.
Mm.
And how do you think it will pan out for Bersatu?
I think it's going to be a big challenge for the Bersatu now. Even in our survey, we noticed that on the ground, Bersatu, I don't think have a very clear presence among the Malay community. I think this is one of the biggest problems faced by the Bersatu. What's left, in my point of view, I'm a bit critical here. What's left of the Bersatu is very much on the head of the division. In the ground, I think Bersatu, I don't think have very much impact. What's important now, because they control the structure of the government, because of the Prime Minister is on the Bersatu, so the structure of the government really helped them in that sense. But to what extent they will survive, I think looking at the current situation, if there is a head-on between them and UMNO, definitely UMNO will swallow them big time, in my point of view. Therefore, Bersatu need another partner. This is why, in my point of view, what happened now, Muhyiddin Yassin is very much to secure the support of PAS for them to tag team to face UMNO, and so far it's a bit secure on that part. However, in my point of view, yes, Bersatu still have a chance. Looking at on the state in the couple of states, but I don't put much hope on Bersatu, because Bersatu so far doesn't really manage to create that there are others to Muhyiddin Yassin to lead them, for example. Especially not only on the federal level, even in the state level, they are facing that problem. So with that, but at the same time, Bersatu are a bit in the not in the bad situation because of the current structure and leadership problem. For the Malays, I think they are very much in that catch-22 situation where to go. They don't have Bersatu don't have national experience and didn't get that support. They're looking at UMNO, they know what UMNO is. So, but this is where, in my point of view, this is where my point is about the option now. Looking at to what extent new leadership within the Malays community can bring up that option. If I look, for example, what happened in Muar, Syed Saddiq give a very good example how the role of new MP can play in that sense. I think that gives very much new hope for Malaysian politics. But to answer your question, does Bersatu have a bright future? I don't think so. If you ask me, I'm a bit skeptical. I don't think Bersatu can last for another 10 years.
What is the future of UMNO? Because according to what Danesh has mentioned, right, it has one of the strongest machinery as a political party. So what is the future of UMNO?
I think for UMNO, definitely, I agree with Danesh just now. When we look at the party, when we analyze the party, the most important is the consistency of the party, the structure of the party. I think UMNO, because of the 60 years, they have that. What UMNO is having now, the problem is leadership. It's nothing to do with the structure of the party. The structure is intact. If you look at the ground, in my point of view, what's happened now for UMNO is they don't have a clear direction from the leaders. As simple as that. So meaning when their leadership have a problem, especially what I call the PWTC leadership, meaning the central leadership, on the ground, they are very much intact, in my point of view. So the emotional risk you can ask them within 24 hours, they hit the ground perfectly well, even without something calling from PWTC. But the problem of UMNO is the image that really, in my point of view, facing the problem is in PWTC, in the central one. This is where, and at the same time, at the structural level, in the bahagian level, the ketua bahagian and others. But for the people, in my point of view, because remember this, I always say this, for Malay community in most of the area, UMNO has become part of structure of the society because the past 60 years, in my point of view, UMNO managed to build their leadership based on that structure. So they are UMNO members, and at the same time, they are village leaders. They are the one that lead them, social leaders. So they play that hat perfectly well on the ground. So what they don't have now is very much a clear good leader maybe in the district, in the national, in the state or national level. But on the ground, I don't think people lose hope on UMNO. They are, in my point of view, they want change, especially the ground, but this is where the leadership like Zahid and others take advantage of the structure to make sure that this type of politics survive. I think this is the future of UMNO, in my point of view. The challenge UMNO is very much not so much with UMNO vis-a-vis the support, but within the UMNO itself. How can they get rid of the bad apple for them? I think that is a challenge.
The bad apple now would be the court cluster, right?
Yep, definitely. Look like it. Yep.
Seems to be like the court cluster, because I think both Danesh and also Dr. Hamidin, we talk about the election. I mean, we talk about how these political parties are going to pan out and stuff like that. Do you both? I mean, this is a question for you both. Do you foresee that there's an election coming up anytime within this year or the next
Danish?
12 months?
Okay, in the next 12 months, I think I would possibly rule out, with the exception for the Sarawak state elections. I think what I would say instead is that all political parties, if they think more rationally in the current situation that we are in, then they should look into different forms of forming a government, whereby the government of the day, I'm not going to comment who, because situation is very fluid, survives or proceeds until the end of the term. Because for the case of Sarawak, it's a different situation, right? Because after August 1st, we have to address the question when the elections will take place for the state, right? So this is where how I see for the federal level, as and even also to the state, especially some state governments with a very razor thin margins, should look to remain intact. And this is where political parties needs to be innovative,
Yeah.
to be creative. We have to reduce excessive confrontational attitude. We where we could, we respect each other where we can, and then where we differ is in terms of our policy. Where we differ is in terms of how we approach the thing, right? So long we follow the norms of parliamentary democracy, right? Okay, so and also the thing is, we can see that at the state level, we can find ways how to have governments remain intact without having the risk of a sudden dissolution. And that is sometimes, if you notice in my conversation today, I tend to look at the states, because I
Yes.
feel at the state, innovation in politics takes faster at the federal level.
Okay. So, Doctor, do you have anything to add on, or what's your take?
I would like to add on. I don't think I agree with Danish. Looking at the current political situation, in my point of view, first because of the pandemic and others, definitely, I don't think anybody who want to call for election now, I don't think it will be popular among the people, because politics, in my point of view, now is the last in the mind of the people. Okay, I don't think people want to think much about the politics because of the social and economic situation that they are facing now. That's one thing. Second thing, because of the Sarawak election, is also should be happen within this year. So I think that will be much concentrated even by the federal government to make sure, because I think any federal government need votes from Sarawak MPs. So because of that, I think they will let the Sarawak thing go first. But so is a Muhyiddin Yassin government will survive? Yeah, I think so. So far, I think they will survive, and definitely, I think, as Danish mentioned just now, this is where we hope we can see the party become innovative in that sense, to think about the people. So even though maybe UMNO pull out and others, but maybe some other arrangement within that democracy allowed us to happen, which I believe. And for me, my wish is simple. I really hope that Malaysian politicians become a matured one, from my point of view. I think this is really they put the call for the countries first rather than call for their also own party or their ethnic groups and others. And yeah, it sounds very much a utopian call, but I think we are about time to have that experience in the country. And I do believe that we can do that. I do believe that we have everything for that. So with that, in my point of view, I do expect. It's going to be a bumpy ride, obviously,
Yep.
but government will survive, in my point of view, until the next
End of the term.
Yeah, I think so.
End of the term. Okay. I guess again, this is very much depending on the government or the power that be, whether they call it election or whatever. But again, they're gonna weigh it against public sentiment, whether it's going to win them vote or whatsoever. But I guess whatever that has transpired over the past few months, right, especially in the political realm, the multiple hiccups in our management of the health crisis has caused many Malaysians to rethink the power they have to influence policies and direction of the nation. Some have even doubts that the democratic system could work to deliver effective governance. Some, I think, especially I don't know whether you have noticed, but some among the Chinese community has mentioned how China has successfully managed their crisis. When you compare this to authoritarian system. So what is your take on this? Maybe what you can tell Malaysians how they can look into a system that really works for them, a system that really deliver results, or delivered some stability, prosperity, or maybe something that they aspired. I'm not so sure. Maybe who can Danish take this first?
Okay, so for me, in the current realm of any given representative democracy that we are taught and we are educated that the rakyat is the boss.
Yes.
Reality is not. Okay? It's actually the party leaders is the boss. Party leaders are the bosses, and the party leaders are probably servants to other forces behind the scene. Okay? So that's the power structure behind it. Okay. So this is where I would argue that we need to do some enhancements to our democratic system, and let's not necessarily follow it. Is one way we are not going to look at the path of authoritarianism. Okay, that's one angle. Or the other part is just to keep on looking at the Western democracy as your example. I think it's time for us to create solutions that's technically almost suitable for developing world. So what I say is a couple of things we can look into. Okay, I will tell you 3 solutions, and I will start with the most easiest one without requiring any form of constitutional amendment.
Okay.
So what we can do is at our local councils, we can start demanding that we should do participatory budgeting. Basically, allocate, let's say, 10% of the development budget of the council for the public to decide what projects matter to them locally. Okay, so of course this is where you do a survey, and then you list out all the important projects. Then subsequently, the residents of that area vote on the project. Okay, and the project or the projects that gets the most votes gets implemented. How it gets implemented is ideally as possible is to get the communities to own it. And then the duty of the council, or maybe even, let's say, you want to get the involvement of the Ahli Dewan Undangan Negeri to monitor and do the necessary audits and see how it progress. Okay. This idea of participatory budgeting, if I understood correctly, started in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989. It is practiced, I think, in thousands of cities of various scales. And I'm just letting you know, in Malaysia, there's only one state who does this in a unique format, that is Penang. So Penang does this called gender responsive participatory budgeting. It's a combination of 2 types of budgeting, because with the angle on addressing issues based on gender. Okay? You don't need to have constitutional amendment. You just need to get your council on board. Okay, if Penang can do it, other states can do it. So that's the first option. Okay. The second one, of course, requires a constitutional amendment. Okay, I echo the calls from the Bersih Coalition that we should have recall elections. Okay. Because how I see recall elections is a method to show that rakyat is the boss. Okay. Of course, there are few varieties of recall elections. I mean, I would just say there's 2, the restricted and also the non-restricted manner. What I noticed in Bersih's case of advocacy is the restricted recall elections, whereby the voters sign a petition and calls for the removal of the incumbent subject to the thresholds that you meet based on few criteria, i.e. the person has the politicians jump ship, or that sort of things, committed a particular offense, that below 2,000 ringgit, if I'm not mistaken, and also being absent. This is an issue with our parliament and state legislative assembly persons. They can choose to be absent. a lot of times from the city, right? So that's a restricted version. For me, how I see recall, ideally speaking, it should be unrestricted. Yes, in Malaysia, I can argue there would be abuse, right? Unrestricted for me is basically the rakyat is not happy with the performance of the politician. They can sign a petition, collect enough signatures, then call for the recall elections, pass the certain thresholds, and then remove that incumbent, right? And then in Malaysia's case, if you remove the incumbent, you institute by-elections. Right? For me, the goal of a recall election is to empower the rakyat to be the boss. Okay. Then the other thing, recall elections requires constitutional amendment. I would say should be applied at the federal level before we think of doing it at the state level. For the next one is a referendum. Okay? This exists in some in the developed world and some in the developing countries. Yes, there is a debate about it. The idea of a referendum is to get the public to own the lawmaking process, to figure out what is the necessary policy direction the country needs to embark on. Because we have to understand, at some stage, our political parties will be so divided on certain issues that they can't move forward. So who can move forward? Who can push it forward? Is the rakyat. Rakyat can decide that they can file a petition, and then the next case is that they collect the signatures, and then they will do a vote. And if the majority say we want to adopt this policy in this referendum, the parliament should adopt it. So that actually shows that the rakyat owns the law-making process to a certain degree. And yes, it can be abused. Yes, you can see the experience of Brexit. Yes, there are failures and everything. But for me, the benefits of a referendum outweighs all of this. It also forces us to be politically aware and stop abdicating our responsibility to everything to our politicians. For me, that's the problem with representative democracy. We go there to vote, and then we totally abdicate our power for the next 5 years. And now we can see how it is screwing us up altogether.
Yep. Prof, do you think you have anything to add on to this, like whether there's a solution or whether you have anything to say to this, some of our very disillusioned voters or maybe fellow Malaysians? Prof, are you muted? I think you're muted.
Yes, okay. Sorry. Okay, I think I'll put it this way, Lichin, my point of view. Our voting system is not perfect, we know that. Okay, and democracy is not perfect. But some of the alternative that have been provided is also will bring us to nowhere. It's worse to some extent. And tyrant and abuser that we see today is happened because we are fatigued of with our own democracy. We allow them to do that. Okay, so they take advantage and run amok with it. So the most important for us, we as a rakyat, don't give them the opportunity to do that. The most important for us is to participate in that democracy system. Okay, not only by voting, but to make sure that any leaders that we appoint, we have the right and responsible. I think that is the most worst thing. It's not only about the right, but also our responsible to question them. And it is their responsible to explain to us. I think with that, in my point of view, we should bring a good, mature culture in Malaysian politics to some extent. So we must be able and brave enough, in my point of view, to fix what is the problem that we have faced. For example, if we see the leaders, yes, the challenge of Malaysian political system because leaders is selected by the constituency. But if the leaders is bad, give a bad example, I think it is responsible for any other people in Malaysia to tell it so. And if the good leaders, we have to praise them, doesn't matter where they are. I think this is, in my point of view, is very important. What happened, in my point of view, in Malaysia to lead to 2018 is historically, in my point of view, I always say that I'm not saying we wake up from the dream, no. But suddenly we realize that we can. That is a big difference. And now that realization is not dying, it's there. And we know we can make it happen again. And I still believe in that. And this is where, in my point of view, not only the chat among the political party, this is where the people itself, I believe, can chart their own destiny with that. Not necessarily believe on, because we can see in the past 60 years of Malaysians politics, mostly is charted by the elite in politics. This is what happened in Malaysia, in my point of view. The only way for us to move forward is very much from bottom, where people decide what is matter most to them. It's no longer for the political party. It is always, in my point of view, and that I can see that's happened in 2018. And I really hope that things will continue from there. And maybe I'm a bit optimistic in that, but I do believe it will continue from there. I don't think we will stop in 2018, where people believe that, okay, they can make a change and they want to be here, and then they want to make them more accountable. I believe that will be the future for Malaysian politics.
Yep. Okay. I think this is actually surprisingly, I wouldn't say surprisingly, because when I first drafted the questions, right, I thought our discussion would be very much on the constitutional part and also on the standing order of our parliament. But now I think we had a good 1 hour discussion on the politics of Malaysia and some of the possibilities that we could have, whether it's from the three suggestion from Danesh, how we can participate in this kind of democracy, and the more how we can like have a say, or like what Prof has said, that we need to actually not only at when during the voting, we must also follow what's going on with politics and hold our politicians that we have voted in accountable to whatever actions they have done. I think some people have abdicated their duties as the moment they cast their vote, that's it, done. I'll come back the next 5 years and see what we can do, and then maybe we continue to rant about the politicians and how or all this elite and how they determine the future of the nation and how we have very little say to it. So I think this is actually a very good note to end our discussion today. I would like to thank Danesh and also Dr. Hamidin for joining us tonight. Your wealth of knowledge, I think I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that our audience have also learned a lot. Hope to see you again on our show. Then we can talk about a little more about what's going on with Malaysia and how we can move forward and provide solutions for our fellow Malaysians. Thank you so much tonight, and thank you to all our audience who have been with us for the 1 hour discussion, and we'll see you again. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.